It's Doctor Who Sunday, and we're going back to classic. Let's get on with it. Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It, with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters, not by myself. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, switch on the notification bells so that you know when I am releasing another video. Thank you to everyone who subscribed already. I cannot run this channel without you. This week we are taking a look at Earthshock, which was voted by you, the subscriber. To vote on the current poll, please head on over to the post page where you can find it. Earthshock was written by Eric Saywood. It aired on 8th to the 16th of March 1982 to an audience of 9.3 million people approximately. It was directed by Peter Grimwade. Earthshock opens up with the expedition on planet Earth. This expedition is a rescue mission. Professor Kyle's work colleagues have been involved in some kind of accident, which is why there is a rescue mission. The soldiers go on a hunt to look for these work colleagues of the professors. Meanwhile, in the TARDIS, Adric and the Doctor are having quite a bitter argument. Adric is fed up with being left out of things and not being told things, and he just wants the Doctor to start explaining things. And he decides that he's going to go home. The Doctor refuses to take him back because going back into E-space is, of course, dangerous. Out of anger, the Doctor lands the TARDIS in the tunnels where the rescue team are, looking for the work colleagues of the professors. Adric decides that he's going to plot the course back home, and Nyssa agrees that is what he should do in order to show the Doctor that it could be done, whilst Tegan, insists on talking to the Doctor. Outside the TARDIS, they discover dinosaur fossils, and they talk about the Big Bang and what might have caused it. The Doctor says they don't really know what caused the Big Bang. Elsewhere, in the tunnels and the caves, the rescue team had split up. Two of the soldiers meet two unknown entities. The entities vaporize them, and they die. There's also a massive rockfall, and the Doctor, Nyssa, and Tegan were also discovered by the rescue team. As the story unfolds, they eventually meet the androids, who begin a mass shootout with them, which then leads to one of the best cliffhangers that we have ever seen in Doctor Who. That's the reveal of the Cybermen. The Cybermen have a bomb on Earth, and that's what the androids are guarding. This bomb, as later is revealed by the Cyber Leader, is to prevent the presidents from destroying the Cybermen. It's for their own survival. The Doctor at this point obviously does not know this, but he is able to deactivate the bomb, and then he decides that they're going to look for where the signal had come from, which had come from a freighter. They land on the freighter, and he and Adric go and investigate. Only then does he learn that the Cybermen, and he can tell that it's Cybermen, and he can tell this by how the men had died on the freighter. It then becomes a race against time to stop the Cybermen from destroying the Earth, because when they learn that the Doctor has destroyed the bomb, they decide that they're going to crash into the freighter into the Earth instead. The Doctor had been forced to leave Adric on the freighter and return to the TARDIS. This is where the freighter now travel back in time to the earliest point in human history, the Big Bang. Naturally, of course, they want to prevent this. However, the Cybermen, or in this case the Cyber Leader, has a very different idea. The Doctor takes Adric's gold star for mathematical excellence and uses it on the Cybermen against his chest. He then takes one of the guns and finishes off the Cyber Leader. Adric, who had been left on the ship with the other crew members, was trying to make it so that the freighter would shift, but he couldn't get the figures right. They tried to pull him into the escape pod as an order. However, he leaves it. He is there alone trying to make the freighter move. Adric then claims he would never know if he was right. And on the TARDIS monitor, we see the freighter crash into the Earth with Adric on it. He is dead. I must say that it wasn't very common in classic, really, to bump off a companion, was it? Before that, there was Katerina, but she isn't really a companion, as she only appeared in 2 stories, in my opinion. But she is listed on the BBC website as a companion, so I guess she is a companion. If you have been a long-time subscriber to this channel or have been on the Sense Sphere, you will know that Earthshock, along with the Twin Dilemma, was one of the first stories that I ever saw of Doctor Who. I can never remember which order it's in. It's very vague, but I do remember this. Adric dying. I was quite young when I saw it, and I was very well aware that out of all the actors on screen that Matthew Waterhouse was playing a teenager. I always assumed that Adric would have been about 15, maybe 16 at most. So it was a bit of a shock as a first timer to Doctor Who to see that kind of thing happen. And I thought it was common. I thought it was a common thing that they did, but it wasn't. It's more common now in whatever version of New Who we're looking at. But back then, it wasn't common at all to have a companion die. Companions would come and go, and they would lead off their own accord, or their contracts would come to an end and they're unceremoniously written out like Dodo was. Yes, I still got smarts about that. She should have had a much better ending. But I found this, as a young person, to be quite traumatic to me. Children and teenagers didn't die, it was only old people. So it put a really harsh reality into my head that children and teenagers could die. Now, that didn't stop me from watching it. I just think it was a reality that, and it wasn't a message in the story per se, but it certainly, well, it definitely hit home for sure. That was for sure. For sure, 100%. Do I think that Adric should have been killed off? Not necessarily. I think that perhaps what they should have done was they should have put him into the escape pod at the same time. I get it. You want a definite ending, though, for the character that is going to be impactful, that people will remember for a long time. Then maybe that is the way forward. That is the way to go. I wouldn't really know because I'm not a writer, I'm not a producer. I am aware, though, that the character of Adric was exceptionally unpopular. Now, I don't mind Adric, and I think that's because of the age that I saw Adric at. And whilst I don't think that in this case, with regards to the character, he would have been better off played by Richard Willis, who played his brother Vash in Full Circle. At the same time, I do understand why Matthew got the role. I know what people think of Matthew's acting, but at the same time, he was very young. And I will say that I think now he's improved a lot. I did a review, and it was quite a while ago now, of Will Hadcroft's BBC audio story, Dark Contract, that's read by Matthew Waterhouse, which is a wonderful story, and I highly recommend you listening to it, should you wish to. That Matthew had improved so much, and that's obviously an age thing in many respects, but the voices he could do were incredible. I did not expect him to be able to do voices like that. His voice distinctively changed every time he did a voice of a different character, and he nailed his interpretation of Peter. But of course, back then, a lot of people didn't like him. However, I also think that in many respects, with the writing of over his era, his tenure on the show, it wasn't written in a way that Matthew was expecting. So he obviously went into this role knowing that it was an Artful Dodger type of character, mathematical genius, and it had that specification. That specification is met in his first story, and then it's kind of forgotten about over his era, and from time to time we get to see it. However, in this we do see it. And once Matthew clinches onto it, and I will stand by this, he gets better. He does. Because he's got that want, that need, and that understanding of that character right there in front of him, and he's able to work with it, and he's able to build on it. He's only able to do so if it's there in the writing, though, in my opinion. He does have this, though, Artful Dodger-esque type of character again in this story. It's being brought forward and back to the table. He is behaving like a petulant child, which I thought was very good. And I think that Matthew did a very fair delivery overall. He gives a much better and much more consistent performance in this entire story than, you know, than he ever did, I think. And I also believe the doctor apologizing to Adric in part two. I genuinely believe that they both had an argument. I really did. Really did. In part four, he probably gives his most believable performance overall, and I think this is because this is something that he can relate to. He says goodbye to the doctor, and then he says goodbye to Tegan, and that he will see her soon. And I felt quite bad for him, actually, because you can see it in his face that he's devastated about losing his job. Well, I say losing, he wasn't fired per se. They just decided it was a good time for him to be written out, and it upset him, and he used that emotion and put it onto the screen. And that's called life experience coming through there. So props to him for utilizing that, and he's probably been able to utilize it even more with other jobs that he has done over the years since then. I've got one small qualm, though, to make about Matthew, and I'm not being mean, okay? It's also in part four with the Cybermen coming into the freighter. Adric's doing all these calculations on the computer and it explodes. But you can see the moment he knows it's going to explode. He becomes quite hesitant. Now, I just so happened to be on a live stream with someone who worked on Earthshock, and he said that he was watching the filming, and what had happened before was that they had done this first take, where the console had exploded, and Matthew, who hadn't necessarily been expecting that velocity, flew backwards, and he said that, and this person said that that should have been the take that they used. But then the director, Peter Grimwade, for whatever reason, decided that he needed to do it again. And I don't know if this is because something was not quite right or the angle was off or something. I don't know. Okay. I genuinely don't know. But Matthew had to do the entire thing again. And that's why we get this hesitant shot. Whilst I wish that we had the first take, you have to do what the director says. So this is the director's vision. That's the take that we ended up with. Now, that small qualm aside, I would also like to say that I think Matthew, and I'm not sure if this is a good point or if this is a bad point, almost upstages Beryl Reid, who plays Captain Briggs. He doesn't quite do it. He seems to be able to hold it back, but it was getting dangerously close. I would never say an actor is bad, but I do call a miscast when I feel like there was one. And I would like to say that Beryl Reid was definitely a miscast in this. I think that the other actress who was playing Berger would have been a much better fit for this character. She was certainly much more assertive, that's for sure. I just don't know really overall what it was and why. I just don't think that she fitted the role. It could be that she has no connection with the language and she doesn't really understand what she's talking about or saying. I don't really know, but there's a very big disconnect between her and the character, in my opinion. I just can't put my finger on it exactly. And I will say, in this case, it's not the writing that's doing that, because I think the writing overall for this story is very, very good. So Eric Sayward wrote this story, and no matter what you think of Eric Sayward and what was going on at the time of the Doctor Who between him and J&T at later stages, this was a really good script. It does have its weaknesses, but it was really good. I think he must have been using something known in writing as, I think it's circle theory, because at the beginning they're talking about the Big Bang and they don't know what caused it. Then at the end of the story, it finishes with the Big Bang and they know what caused it. I quite like circle theory in many respects because it is a formula that allows for something, in my opinion, to feel much more complete. And I think that Eric is very good at planting things as well that happen throughout the story and tie it into the end. He ties it really well into the end. And this is why, in many respects, the resolution to this story doesn't feel like it's coming out of the blue either. For example, he gets the Doctor to talk about the fact that the Cybermen are allergic to gold, and it plays havoc with their respiratory system. Well, that was a bit of a mouthful. Essentially, it suffocates them. And I think that's one of my favourite bits as well, just so you know. To which Adric reacts and takes off the gold star. And then the Doctor gets hold of it a bit later on and uses it against the the cyber leader, excuse me, which then results in the cyber leader's demise. I think that it all adds to the story, and I think really everything that he put in added to the story in some way, even if there are weak points with the story. For example, one of the biggest down points to this story is the fact that it suffers from the companions staying in the TARDIS. For the most part, it's Nissa, but in part one, it's Adric. There was a decision at the end, and I think also this may have been made by J&T actually. I'm not 100% sure. I think it is to have the credits rolling at the end with no Doctor Who theme playing over, and to have the crumbled up star as if it's a memory to Adric. Adric really wasn't that much of a popular character, so it probably in many respects with the adults at least wouldn't have left that much of an impact. And secondly, you need that signature Doctor Who theme to know it's the conclusion, right? How many times can I stumble over that word? But you've got to know it's the conclusion. The only other downside I have, and this is not to do with any of the writing, this is to do with the acting in part, is the cyber leader gently pushes aside the captain, which is fine because obviously David Banks is a very tall man and Beryl Reid was quite short in comparison to him. However, she had little to no reaction at all, which then failed to make it look aggressive because the Cybermen are supposed to be aggressive. I would have liked to have seen a reaction that sold that push. Even if David Banks did not want to push her very hard at all, she should have reacted much more than what she did. But there you go. That being said, I don't really have many negatives to say about this particular story. I do normally try to keep my reviews under 30 minutes. I don't think this is going to happen for this one. It's very difficult because it's such a detailed story. I think the biggest thing about this story was the Cybermen. If I've got this correct, this cliffhanger was kept under lock and key. In fact, the Cybermen was kept under lock and key. They didn't reveal that they were returning to Doctor Who, did they? So that first cliffhanger that we get, even though I can go and carry on and watch it, would have been one heck of a shock, because the last time you saw the Cybermen would have been with Tom Baker, and to be fair, you hadn't seen them all that much, and John Pertwee never faced them at all. So when they suddenly turn up at the end of part one, people must have been jumping off their seats. That close up that zooms in on Peter's face and him just looking into the camera, and then it just switches to the Cybermen, is jaw dropping. We also get a nice little sequence of the other Doctors as well, which is overutilized in today's Doctor Who. Quite like the look of these Cybermen, it's very clear who the cyber leader is because he's got on this black helmet, and I think that it looks really great. Their voices, whilst they're extremely different to early Cybermen, I do like the deeper voices. That is what they go for. They tried to do a very distinct difference between early Cybermen and these Cybermen. They're likely to have evolved because their main goal, which is to survive, which is why they began converting themselves. You know what I find funny is that the Cybermen constantly bang on and on and on about emotions and how emotions make people weak. Yet they fear, don't they, really? If you think about it, at the end of the day, it's their fear that makes them weak, because the Doctor's defending emotions against the Cybermen, human emotions, and the Cybermen then use the Doctor's emotions against him as well at the same time. But the irony is their fear is their own destruction. And I love that about the Cybermen. And Peter's face when he sees the Cybermen, in this case, obviously it's for the first time, but it's like he's reacting to having not seen them in years. And then you've got a bit of an homage, I guess you could say, to the tomb of the Cybermen. You have them breaking out of their cocoons in various different ways to obviously root up and rile up the story, and it ends with an army of Cybermen, and that's Cybermen in the door. This is some really good visuals. I don't know what their budget was like for this story, but boy, oh boy, they really did hammer in some really, really outstanding visuals for the time. And the Cybermen are planning to drive the freighter into Earth to prevent the president from destroying the Cybermen. And this was all because the Doctor deactivated the bomb. Absolute genius. This is very much a base under siege story, isn't it, as well? Now, I just want to go back to the visuals because I've mentioned them and I didn't really elaborate, but I have to get to the last point as well. So I love the quarry, love the tunnels, love the idea behind the expedition, but we've got Snyder who gets vaporized by the androids, and there's this really horrible green goop that comes out of her costume. It's really disgusting. I think I like the visuals around the shootouts in part 1 and part 2 with the androids, and the androids are shooting from their hands and there's explosions coming from them, which is actually a risky thing to do. I think overall this story has some fantastic pyrotechnics in this as well. I think that was purposely done given what the ending of the story had to be. I think it was Eric Sayward setting us up for something that was going to be a very dismal ending, so to speak. It was certainly something that was impactful. It builds up for the ending to lose a character. The pyrotechnics, the explosions, the special effects, everything that he did, everything that he wrote was to be specifically depressing for the ending. And I like that. And I also think that he writes the Doctor very well. I think it was a good idea to write an argument between the Doctor and Adric. It added a fair bit of contrast. The Doctor also prioritizes the safety of his companions. He makes sure that Nyssa stays in the TARDIS, which is a bit of a cop out. But he also deactivates the bomb signal and the bomb by using the TARDIS and his own initiative in order to save absolutely everyone. And his total and utter priority was to defeat the Cybermen and keep his companions safe. And yes, okay, he messes up, and I think it has that huge impact then because he is unable to keep Adric safe. Indeed, the ending finishes on him and his reaction to Adric's death. But Adric's death is not addressed much after that, only a little bit. It's not really until the Big Finish audio dramas do they start looking at it when it starts with spare parts. The cliffhangers are probably some of the best for Peter Davison's era. The first one is the shot of the Cybermen and the Cybermen saying, destroy them at once, which is quite an epic cliffhanger. The second one is the Doctor and Adric getting caught by Ringway, and Ringway saying that he will execute murderers. And then in part 3 is where the cyber leader says, my army awakes, Doctor, and you see the Cybermen bursting out of their vessels. They don't really give Nyssa all that much to do in this story other than stay in the TARDIS. However, they do give Tegan a fair bit to do in this one. Tegan does call herself a mouth on legs, which I do approve of. Tegan is my favourite female companion of the classic era, which says a lot because Donna is also my favourite companion from the new era. But I think if I had to choose between the two, I would probably choose Donna. Not anything that's sort of later version of Donna, though. Series 4 Donna. Okay, Series 4 Donna. Does Tegan has as headstrong as ever and leaving the TARDIS when she's not supposed to have a massive impact on the story? No. Other than her being used as a bargaining chip, she really doesn't have that much of an impact on this particular story. She's there to be captured, as the companion's role is. The companion that was utilized the best was Adric, obviously. I would say that this story is probably one of Peter Davison's best stories overall. It's certainly up there on a list for sure. But that's what I think. Now, it is time to find out what you think from your comments that you left on the community post. Let's take a look. Lawrence Steele says, one of the best cliffhangers ever, especially reading the backstory on how much J&T invested into it. Underrated producer, in my opinion. Yeah, I agree. 100% agree that it's one of the best cliffhangers ever. Is J&T underrated, though? We looked at this in depth on the Sense Sphere ages ago now. Ages ago. We were looking at who was a good custodian of Doctor Who, and we voted JNT out on top. And then, of course, we had Verity, Lambert, and RTD version 1. And JNT was really highly rated amongst us. So I don't necessarily think he's underrated. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's rated, if that makes sense. There's a lot of people who like a lot of the stuff that he did. And then there's a lot of people that like the stuff don't like the stuff that he did. So, I mean, go figure. I don't know at the end of the day. I think he's rated though. David Finley says, big fan. Remember that reveal like it was yesterday. I personally liked Adric and his death was pretty shocking for the time. It was the first time a companion had died. No, I don't see Katerina and Sarah as fully fledged companions. It raised the stakes and made it a dark story even more edgy. Yeah, I understand what you mean by saying that about Katerina and Sarah. Adric was definitely a fully fledged companion for sure, and it was very shocking and a big risk as well, especially because of Adric's age, I think. Mark says, Adric goes boom. Many Who fans cheered with delight. Great story to go out on, dark and atmospheric. Yes, it was a fantastic story for any actor to finish on, no matter what Matthew would have thought at the time. I really do think he had a good way out, despite what I said earlier. Andrew Parker says, I'm glad that Adric was killed. It should have been the final story of that season. I agree with that, actually. I think it should have been the final story instead of, what was it? It was Time Flight? Was it Time Flight? But they were potentially writing out two characters almost back to back at this point. I know that Janet Fielding didn't even know she was due to come back to Doctor Who, which is why she ended up getting that haircut, because she wasn't contractually bound to keep it. Maybe there was a potential for swapping over the two stories and have Tegan left at Heathrow Airport prior to that, therefore making an even bigger shock when she returns in the following series, and then having Adric bumped off later and having Nissa do all of Tegan's part in that story. And I also think that it would have been a much better and cleaner finish for Matthew. And finally, Sadako says, the best story of season 19 by far. Mostly very solid, with everyone bringing their A game to this, and the violence being very straight for the jugular. Only really loses points for me on Tegan having some real dumb moments. It makes sense for Nissa to be clueless on dinosaur history, but not Tegan. And the ending feeling more like an abrupt cliffhanger than a resolution. But those few minor complaints outweigh the good stuff. I do agree. I forgot to say earlier, but Tegan really does have some stupid moments in this with Earth history. It's all very common knowledge for her about the dinosaurs. We're taught that in school. Nissa should have been the one asking about that because she's from Track and she wouldn't know about these things. But I think that comment sums it up quite nicely. That's what I think, though. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye bye.